return, we understand those that were taken into Babylon, they came back about 70 years later. But that dispersion caused many Jewish people to essentially be dispersed out into the world. Before the fall of Jerusalem and of the northern kingdom, most 99% of Jewish people in the world congregated around the nation of Israel at the time. Whereas after the dispersion, you began to see more and more groups of Jewish people, Jewish communities throughout different parts of the world, whether it be in the Middle East area or in what we know as today's modern Turkey or the rest of Europe. For example, we know Saul, he was of Tarsus. I believe Tarsus is somewhere in Turkey. The dispersion that occurred for many Jewish people and the Jewish communities that built up in other parts of the world. And usually when dispersion is being referenced for Jewish people, it's that understanding that they are in different parts of the world, but they're not in their homeland being Israel, to be understood at the time. However, the meaning for dispersion here, it's meant to reference that, but it's meant to reference how we as Christians, how we are dispersed. We are dispersed from our homeland, but our homeland is not of this earth. In fact, our homeland is in heaven one day, and he wants them to remember that, that we are dispersed throughout the world, us as Christians. Some of us are here in Westlaco, some of us are in Harlingen, some of us are on the other side of the globe in India or China, but that all of us remember that while we are dispersed throughout this world as Christians, one day we'll be able to return home to God in heaven. And that's a beautiful thing for us to remember. And that's what he wants to remind them here in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29, it states, "And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise." The idea being that as Christians, we are the successors of the Jews, that we are now the children of God, that one day we will return home with our Father in heaven. Through him. But that's the first couple things that we can get from the greetings. Let us go ahead and start reading the first few verses. Verse 2, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." So here, the first thing, immediately after greeting them, James starts off by reminding them to have joy in the trials and tribulations that they are dealing with, which is something weird because, usually whenever we go through a rough patch, we don't consider, our first thought isn't to be joyous, isn't to be happy. The idea of joy is a more permanent happiness. Happiness is something that is fleeting, it's temporary. For example, today we have the potluck, correct? Okay, I just want to make sure. So today we'll have the potluck, and if I end up getting a plate of dessert, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be like, hey, I got dessert. Awesome. But an hour or two later, I'm going to forget about that. I'm going to be at work. I'm not going to be thinking, that plate of dessert I had, it made my week. I'm just going to be happy at the moment. I'm going to eat my plate, and that's that. That's happiness, something it's very simple, very temporary. Joy is something that is more permanent, is something that's a state of being. For example, I find joy in the fact that I have parents that love me. I find joy in the fact that I have this church that loves me and has helped me grow as a person personally. And most importantly, I have joy knowing that one day, as a Christian, I will be able to be with my Father in heaven. That's more of a permanent feeling, that no matter the circumstances, I can go back to those things. If I'm having a rough day at school or at work, I can remember, hey, I have parents that love me. I have a church that loves me. I have a God that loves me. That's an example of something of a more permanent happiness, something that can keep me going no matter what. And what James is arguing here is that kind of joy that we find in those things, we should find in those difficulties, in those trials and tribulations. And the reason why is because it'll produce steadfastness. Now, what is steadfastness? Steadfastness means to be firm and unwavering, to essentially grow resilient despite the difficulties of life, despite the difficulties that you may be dealing with. The way that I personally view the steadfastness is working out in the gym. The first time you ever work out, the weights feel hard, it's difficult to move them, but then the more and more you do it, yeah, it's going to hurt at the beginning, you're going to be sore. For example, I haven't worked out my legs in like 2 months, and I worked them out yesterday. I was struggling to get out of bed today. I was slightly tempted to stay in. Obviously I couldn't, but that's just an example, the idea of just building up that physical strength, and to see the results, to become steadfast, to where what was once difficult becomes normal. Likewise, as something like the gym builds up physical strength, to build up spiritual strength means to endure in those trials and tribulations, to come out of them better and stronger and wiser. And finally, he ends it off in verse 4, stating that you will be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. When I first read that, I believed it to understand, I read it understanding it more the idea of that the steadfastness will make you a more mature Christian, make you more wise in that way. And I do think that's partially what it means, but I like what the commentary in my Bible says, the idea that when we continue in steadfastness, when we come to meet Christ one day, whether it be, this physical body passing, or if Jesus comes before that occurs, that God will see us building up our steadfastness. He will see us attempting to be mature, and that we will be perfect by being with him. And that's something really powerful that I didn't think about when I read this verse. Quite frankly, that ultimately we should be excited to become mature in Christ, to grow as Christians in that way. And that's something, that I know I'm personally trying to do, and all of us are trying to do individually in our walks with Christ. He's trying to remind them, because many of the Jewish Christians were dealing with trials and tribulations. One of the big things is, going back to the idea of those Jewish communities, in those Jewish communities, everyone there followed the Jewish faith. So now the primary audience here is Jewish Christians. They were once following that faith, and now they have changed to a different faith, the faith that we now have in the New Testament. And there's joy to be found in that, but sometimes there's going to be difficulties. Their brother or their brother or their sister or their friend who still may have remained in Judaism. Now there may be disagreements, there may be dissensions, there may be difficulties, trials and discrimination and persecution in that way. Persecution from from Roman citizens, from the Roman Empire itself. We know with history, we understand how there was difficulties for the Jewish people there, and he's trying to remind them that they should find joy in that. These difficulties will help make them more mature, help them grow in their faith with Christ. Following in verses 5 through 8, let's go ahead and read. Verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea that is driven and tossed in the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. Here, going back to verse 4, he tells them that through steadfastness they will be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But, the reader might be thinking, I feel like I'm lacking something. So James immediately answers that by saying, if you feel that you lack wisdom, go to God and ask for that wisdom. We understand the way that we can go to God is through prayer and through reading of his word. But he's trying to remind them that if we go to God for wisdom being not just knowledge, but knowing how to apply that knowledge, having experience, having good judgment. As a relatively younger guy, I only have a certain level of wisdom, whereas I know many of you all here, you all have experienced more than me, so I know you all have more wisdom than me, more understanding of the Bible, more understanding of applying it to your lives, just because you have gone through more than I have. So I know that if I have difficulties, I can go to you all because you all have that wisdom. Likewise, I can go to God for the best wisdom, whether it be going through his word or going to him in prayer. But here James is trying to remind them that, if they're going to go to God in prayer, if they're going to go to his word, at the time for them, they might have had a few letters. It's hard to say, especially if we're to believe that James was one of the earliest books written. But they still had the Old Testament. They could still go to the old scriptures to understand, to help them understand their faith. They could still go to God in prayer. The idea here about how sometimes, when James is talking about how sometimes there's that we may be doubting when we ask God for wisdom, when we ask God for answers, for understanding. James, tells us that the one who doubts, the one who goes to God with uncertainty, is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways, because he's prioritizing other things. Maybe he goes to the scriptures and he chooses to ignore certain passages or chooses to not apply certain things to his life. The way that it reminded me of the verse in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The idea that sometimes when we choose to focus on physical desires, physical attributes, that when we go to God, when we try to go to him as our master, to learn from him, if we do not completely trust him and instead trust in ourselves, it's not going to be effective for us. The wisdom that is found in this book, the wisdom that is found by going to God in prayer, we will not find if we do not trust him. Finally, let us continue to verse 9, as it reads. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat, and withers the grass. Its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Here, what James is trying to tell them is that the poor, the Christians who are poor, they should let others know about the blessings that can be found in poverty. We often think it's very easy to think, especially because we've been influenced by the world. It's easy to mentally associate poverty as a negative thing. But here James is trying to tell them, no, boast about it. Recognize that there are blessings to be found. That you're not so attached to the world. You're not trying to find status in the world. You're just trying to get by in the world. If we have time, I want to go to the final part of this chapter, but we'll see how far we get. How there is joy to be found in poverty, because it allows us to not be distracted by the things in the world, but instead more focus on God, more focus on pursuing what he wants from us. Whereas here, James is telling them that the rich Christians should let others know that the riches are temporary, that they are soon to fade away, that they shouldn't dwell on riches. The commentary of this text points out that one of the trials that many of the Christians, the readers here, might have been facing is the discrepancies with the wealth among Christians. How many of the Christians at the time were putting too much praise and focus on brothers who were rich instead of the brothers who were poor financially. And we'll see that a bit in chapter 2 of the sin of partiality. And I think that's a very powerful thing, and that's something that affects many churches today. I know here at our church, we're blessed with the fact that we have brethren who are wealthy, who have obtained wealth, through various means, but they don't flaunt it, they don't try to make everyone focused on that. Instead, they use that to bless the church. They have helped us in many endeavors. I know personally, I can thank many of y'all years ago, or how we've had the mission trips. The mission trips have not been cheap, I will fully admit that. But many of y'all here and across other churches have been able to financially support us, to help us, not just me, but other brethren in the church, to support us in that way. And that's something that we're thankful for, that the wealth that you all have obtained, you've used it for the church, to bless the church in various ways. But going back to the idea of pursuing wealth, going back to that idea, I think of someone, I don't want to say their name, someone that I know who they were pursuing job opportunities that would have made them a lot of money. Not to have been like ridiculously rich, but to have been pretty wealthy, pretty well off. But they told me instead that they're going to focus their life on ministry instead. They're going to make some changes to focus on that. And I was talking with them about that, and how the ministry that they wish to pursue financially it's going to be a lot less. It's not going to be as much as what they were originally going for. But they were telling me about the passion that they found in pursuing ministry, in pursuing being a blessing for the church. And I ask that you pray for that, brother. That's something that takes a lot of wisdom, a lot of maturity to do. That's something that I know I'm personally struggling with trying to figure out, and I can respect that, and I love that, brother, for choosing to pursue godly, pursue godly desires, things that will bless the church as a whole. Yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, that's good.
Something to consider about wealth in scriptures. It would plead with warnings about wealth. And I'll just leave it what I'm going to say here. It's real simple. Wealth can be a trap.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wealth can definitely. The pursuing of wealth can result in not pursuing godly desires. I think of the idea that sometimes that's not to say that we shouldn't be like trying to obtain wealth in a way. Obviously, if you have a family, you are supposed to provide for that family. You need to make sure that what you're doing supports your family, or that you can make ends meet. But kind of like the question to ask yourself, if you have the opportunity to take a promotion at work, or have an opportunity to have a new job offer, the question you should ask yourself, am I pursuing this new job offer, this promotion? Am I pursuing it so that I can make ends meet better for my family, so I can make sure that my kids have food on the table and that I'm taking care of them? Or am I pursuing the promotion or the job opportunity simply because the extra money will allow me to go on vacations more often, will allow me to buy a nicer house, will allow me to buy a nicer car? That's something that we have to ask ourselves in those situations, and that we need to remind ourselves that when we pursue that wealth, it can cause us to look away from God. Finally, let's continue. Any other questions, any comments? No? Okay, we can continue to verse 12. Next page. As it reads, verse 12. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Verse 12 reminds me of one of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, the end of the Beatitudes, verses 11 and 12, as Jesus states, Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. It's a very similar sentiment that we find in this verse, the idea that there's blessings to be found by persevering through the trials and tribulations, by being steadfast, by growing mature. The way James describes it, that we will receive the crown of life, we will receive the greatest blessing of all. The way Jesus describes it, about the blessing that we receive. I know early in the Beatitudes, I didn't write it down here in my notes, he talks about that the kingdom of heaven is for those who persevere through persecution, who continue to choose to follow him. So he's reminding them that there is a reward to be found in persevering and in being steadfast. But sometimes, in those situations, in those times when we are tempted, when we're going through trials, it's easy to try to find ways to blame others. How many Christians will try to blame God for the temptations. And verse 13, James is chastising them for those beliefs, for those thoughts, reminding them that God is not the one who's bringing those temptations into their lives. Rather, he continues talking about that those temptations come from our own desires, and that we must have a level of personal responsibility. We must hold ourselves accountable in that way, that when those temptations come to us, whatever it be, it could be a temptation of alcohol, it could be a temptation of not controlling our tongues, it could be a sexual temptation, whatever it be, that ultimately we're the ones that make that choice to give in to that temptation or choose to abstain from it. Verse 15, he warns us about what happens when we give in to those temptations, how giving in to desire leads to sin, and sin separates us from God And if we continue to live within that sin, that separation will end up being permanent, which leads to death, not only a physical death, but a spiritual death, a separation from God. To kind of recognize this, that when we overcome our temptations, when we overcome our personal desires, and choose to stay within the Lord, we become wiser, we become more steadfast. We know how to deal with those situations better. We know how to help brethren who are dealing with those situations. And in being wiser and more steadfast in our faith, it leads us to, where am I? Which it leads us to perfection that we can find in Christ by being complete with Him on the day when He returns, or once this flesh comes to pass. Likewise, as overcoming temptation and desire brings forth those blessings, giving into the temptation and desire, as stated in verse 15, that when we begin to give into that causes us to sin, and when we continue to sin, that leads to that spiritual death and that separation from God. Verse 16, as it reads, we'll go and continue. Do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of His own will He brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of His creatures. James counteracts the previous claim that, no doubt there were probably some brethren in the church that were trying to say, temptations come from God. Unfortunately, that was probably something that was occurring in those times. Remember, this is the first century church. They're still trying to figure things out. And unfortunately, misinformation is going to exist. So James is trying to counteract that information, first by telling them temptations do not come from God, but instead counteracting it by telling them that what God gives to us is the good and perfect gifts. The good gifts being the blessings that we have on earth. Going back to my personal example, that I can always find joy in recognizing that I have a family that loves me, like a biological family that loves me. I have this church family that loves me. Those are good gifts that I have. But the perfect gift that I have, and that we all have as Christians, is the gift that is found in Jesus, of being free from sin and one day being able to be in heaven with Him. And that is what he's trying to remind them of, that God does not give bad things. He does not bring temptations to your life, but instead He will always give you good things, the temporary good things and the most permanent good thing, the most perfect good thing. Verse 8, and one of the things that he mentions is that we can trust God because He is unchanging. That's something that's kind of easy to forget. In the back of my mind, I think even of the people that I love, my friends and my family, that I do my best to trust them in many aspects, but it's always in the back of my mind, that no matter how good my mom is at everything, there's always going to be a time when unfortunately she can mess up, or my dad, and I love them dearly, they're my parents, but I recognize they're human, they can mess up just like I can mess up, they can trust me, and there's been times where, I have failed to deliver on that trust, personally, but it's something that I always recognize that no matter what, God is unchanging. I can always trust God that if I do my part in living a Christian life, I can trust God that when I die or when He returns, that promise will be fulfilled. I will, as a Christian, find perfection in Christ. Likewise, the same is for all of us, that we can have that complete trust in Him, that God is unchanging in that way. And finally, in verse 18, talking about us being brought forth by the word of truth, how God's plan through Christ was to bring forth Christianity, for Christians to exist. This group of people that we are, that are now His people. We as Christians are now God's children. Once it was the Jewish people, but now under the New Testament, it is the Christians. And as Christians, we take precedence over all of creation. How God places above the beasts of the earth, above the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea, God places humans above that. And within humans, those that choose to follow Him, those that choose to be Christians and remain steadfast in their faith, God places them above. As James calls us, the first fruits of all His creatures. The idea of the first fruits being when sacrifices were made, that they would get the best of their fruit, the first fruits, essentially, and present those to God, because that was the best of what they had. And as Christians, we are the best of what he has. So James's introduction in verses 2 through 18 is about reminding the reader the principles of what it means to be a Christian, that in the face of trials and temptations, we can either grow as Christians and receive the blessings of the Lord, or we can give into those trials and temptations and be separated from God. And so it's more, these are principles for us to understand that applied to the Christians thousands of years ago, and that still apply to us today. The idea of what it means to overcome temptation, to overcome those trials and tribulations. And now, James, we're going to finish off chapter 1 today, the following few verses. He begins to discuss about what it means to apply those principles to our lives, when examples of those trials and tribulations, those temptations. So we'll go and continue reading, starting in verse 19. Know this, my beloved brethren, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. So here he is first telling them, before any actions that you deal with, interacting within the church or outside of the church, there must be a control of the self, the control of our personal emotions. The idea of taming the tongue, being slow to speak, being quick to hear, to hear someone when difficulties occur, to see where they're coming from. Because if we give in to anger, that can cloud our judgment and affect our actions and our words. I can think personally, at my job, I'm not the manager, but I'm one of the assistant managers. I can think how sometimes, I've had my workers mess up. They've set up a membership incorrectly. They clicked a few wrong buttons. The computer messed up. They didn't clean something properly. And at that moment, there is an anger that's to be found, that I find, being upset. Hey, I taught you how to do this, and you did not do it the way I told you how before. So in the moment, the emotions build up, and I want to get mad at them. But I have to but I remember, the idea that they know that I'm a Christian, and that if I reprimand them in a negative way, that if I act on those emotions, not only am I going to be a bad boss, but I'm going to be a bad Christian. And I love verse 20, the way he states it. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. There is a righteous anger that can be found. We think of when Jesus was angry at the merchants that were in the temple, that righteous anger that he had when he kicked them out because of how they were mocking God through their actions, through their business, by trying to generate money from a holy place, from the most holy place at the time. There is a righteous anger that can be found. But when we focus on a worldly anger, getting angry at my coworker for messing up, that does not produce righteousness of God. But instead, if I control my emotions, I first hear them out, that maybe they explain there was a rush, that, they didn't properly understand it the first time, that I first hear how they messed up, and I'm slow to speak, that I control myself and tell them, hey, okay, you messed up, but this is how we're going to do better next time. Let's do better at this. Instead have a constructive criticism to help build them up so that they're better at their job the following time. And there is a blessing to be found in that. Not only do they see me as a better boss, but they also see, this man who calls himself a Christian. He is not acting as the world would. He is not giving into his emotions and lashing out when mistakes occur, when difficulties occur. I'm using myself as an example, but I know we can all think of personal examples in our lives of when it's important to control emotions, when it's important to control the tongue. And there is a level of humility that we must have when we do that, because because part of pride is there's the pride of the self, acting on your own self-interest. And going back to my personal example, if someone messes up at work, if I want to be prideful in that moment, the immediate reaction that I have is what I'm going to want to do, because it's me. This is who I am. People will sometimes use that excuse, but rather it's important to be humble in that moment and recognize the blessings that can be found in being slow to anger, in being slow to speak, and quick to hear. And where am And having that humility helps you not engage in those personal desires. The personal desire of maybe giving into anger, or the personal desire of giving into temptation and sin. Having humility to recognize, hey, that's not what I'm supposed to do. Not only because is it wrong on principle, but because God does not want me to do it. The first way that we can apply the Word of God in our lives as Christians is in controlling the self and in controlling our emotions. The following few verses 22 through 25, we'll go ahead and read. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man that looks at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If you all have a highlighter, I highly recommend highlighting verse 22. This verse, I think encapsulates the book of James as a whole. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. I don't know if some of y'all watch TikToks or YouTube shorts. Sometimes I'll waste time on that. One of the things that I love watching are food tutorial videos, those 60-second videos of someone explaining how to make a certain dessert or how to make a certain food. I love the steak videos. Those are some of my favorites to watch. When people describe, how to make a steak, what to put it in, yada, yada. I love watching those videos. I can waste hours on that. I'm going to be honest, though, I've never cooked a steak in my life. Never. I don't know how to use a grill. Going to be completely honest. My parents, they have a grill at the house. I don't know how to touch that thing. My dad showed me before, and I forget. But I love steak. I love eating at steakhouses or going to places and they have steak. I can watch those videos all I want. I can waste hours of my life watching those TikToks and YouTube shorts of people making steaks or making a variety of other foods. But if I never actually apply those videos to my life, if I never take the time to sit at the grill and learn how to cook the steak, learn to put the exact correct seasonings and stuff, what purpose does it serve me? Likewise, I could spend hours of my day, hours of my time reading my Bible, which would be a good thing, which is a blessing in and of itself. But if I never apply what the Bible teaches me, what good will it ultimately serve me? The previous verses, the way James perfectly describes it, of being quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. This is something very powerful that applies to us today. But if I choose not to apply that to my life, what good does that serve me? And the way he describes it, of a man who looks at himself in the mirror and he sees all his blemishes, he sees his imperfections, and he chooses to do nothing about it. What good does the mirror serve him then? Especially at that time when mirrors were expensive. It was a whole process to create a mirror, So to own one meant, it was an investment. There was a benefit. There was very few people who owned it at the time. And if you chose not to use it correctly, to apply it to yourself, then what good did it serve you? Likewise, as a Christian, when we go to God, we need to trust Him and apply what He tells us to our lives. Finally, the last few verses, we'll go ahead and read and finish up. Verse 26, for if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So here we learn a couple tenets of what it means to have a true religion. The first is the taming of the tongue, going back to that idea that religion should cause us to control our emotions, to control our ego, and instead, be humble in that way, to not give in to anger, to not give in to what the tongue desires to do. And we'll read more about that in the coming chapters of the taming of the tongue. The second thing that we read here is being a blessing to those who need the blessings the most. At the time for them, it was widows and orphans. Orphans, even today, they don't have parents, and it's so much difficult for them to have a better life. And that is an example of someone that we should look to be a blessing towards. Or widows at the time, and even today, how how, they needed those blessings, they needed the help from the church. And likewise, widows today, that we can be a blessing to, whether it be financial or just on a spiritual, emotional level as a family. And finally, where he ends it off, and we'll end off the chapter today, the idea to be different from this world. Years ago, I was talking with Bill Roach about some personal things. I went to him as an older brother asking for guidance. And I always love the way he described it, and this verse reminds me of it, to keep oneself unstained from the world. That he talked about how we are in this world as Christians. We have to pay our taxes, we have to buy food and groceries, we have to have a job, we have to do stuff in this world. So while we are in this world, we need to remember that as Christians, we are not of this world. We are not creatures of the earth, but instead, going back to the idea of the dispersion, that we are dispersed around the world, but that eventually one day we'll be with God in heaven, that is our true home, and that's something that we must always remember. And what a beautiful way to end off the chapter, to remind us, that where our true home lies, where our true intentions must lie, and why we do everything to ultimately one day be with God in heaven. We'll go and end off the chapter here. Does anyone have any comments, any questions, any corrections if I said anything wrong? No? Let's go and finish off with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll go ahead and take a break. Let us pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Thank you for this morning, for allowing us to study your word. We pray that we remember the blessings that can be found in growing and persevering through trials and tribulations, how we can grow better as Christians, and that when we look to your